It's about looking forward. You know, it's very nerve-wracking. The bigger the risk, the bigger the win. What does that mean? It's like when you're betting big or small, and the clock is covered. Then you reveal the dice. And you're really nervous. Tomorrow, Donald Trump will announce the tariff policy. We're really being played by Donald Trump. He keeps releasing different news, different policies. And in just one day, it will be revealed, right? It should be certain, right? He won't change his mind, right? Let's see how much tariff he actually wants to impose. According to the latest, what did Donald Trump say? And how much impact will it have on the American economy? I'll give you some opinions from others and then I'll share my own opinion with you. On March 31st, Donald Trump stated to the media aboard Air Force One that on April 2nd he would announce reciprocal tariffs, which would include all countries. Unlike earlier, when it was revealed that it would only target the 15 countries with significant surpluses with the US, he changed his mind. Initially, he said, oh, other countries don't have surpluses, but then he thought it over and realized that wouldn't work. Because those countries with large surpluses would just ship their goods to other countries. If you really want to block all these things, you have to be the most effective. Globally, the most effective. All right. He promised to announce this large tariff on April 2nd, the so-called Liberation Day. Why April 2nd? Because April 1st is April Fool's Day. And tariffs have already been imposed on steel, aluminum, and cars. Now the actual collection is from China's 20%. I don't know if in the future he will collect 20% from the whole world, whether it will be on top. I think it will be on top. It will be on top, and then it's that 25% is collected worldwide on steel and aluminum, and 25% on cars. That's what's been announced so far. China's 25% tariff. It's about $100 billion in reduced tariffs, and about $30 billion in car tariffs, estimated to be around 60 to 70 billion dollars, adding up to $200 billion. In early February, he signed a memorandum asking U.S. trade officials to review them one by one. How much are they charging us? Then tailor-make a set of countermeasures to respond to what he considers unfair practices. That is, their tariffs. Actually, there are three purposes, and I'll clarify the first one here. It serves as a policy tool. For example, if he wants to punish Venezuela because Venezuela refuses to take back those illegal immigrants, then he imposes this tariff. This is a type of policy measure. Secondly, it is to balance the trade imbalance. Fair trade. Thirdly, it is to address the issue of the U.S. trade deficit and to encourage manufacturing to return to the U.S. There are three different directions. He denies that the new tariffs will only target the 15 major countries, meaning those that actually impose high tariffs on the U.S. and have significant trade volumes. The spokesperson for the top 15 countries said, "Look, this person argues with others every day. He argues with others every day." On April 2nd, this spokesperson announced in the White House Rose Garden a country-based reciprocal tariff. That means they won't impose tariffs item by item, but how many percent for China? Each country has a certain percentage with no exemptions. Let me explain it to you. In the past, China used to impose effective tariffs, right? It was a 15%, and this time they added 20%. They increased it by 20% for the whole world, right? I believe China has to add another 20% on top of that. Why? Because they said the first tariff increase was to punish China. during trade negotiations. They went back on their word and later said the 20% was because of the fentanyl issue, that the fentanyl problem wasn't resolved, so they couldn't reduce that 20%. Otherwise, wouldn't it be nothing? If China also adds 20%, doesn't that mean there's no punishment for fentanyl, and then China would become 55%? Going to other countries, to the US, they won't be able to do that. This is because other countries will set up barriers for your goods. Since China can't go to the US, they will flood other countries with their products. So, other countries will have to create a firewall or a dam to block China's cheap goods. The Wall Street Journal. On March 30th, and the Wall Street Journal. There are some internal news from Donald Trump internal discussions about whether to impose tariffs on all incoming goods. It's about 20%. I also think it's around 20%. Because according to their economist calculations, 20% comes out to be 20 to 25%, which is optimal, meaning that the US would gain the most advantage. Because you impose a 20% tariff on the whole world. Because of competition, the other party will absorb part of it, so overall, it's beneficial for the US. The increase in car tariffs and other tariffs amounts to $600 billion. That's $6 trillion over 10 years. Okay, let's do the math. Let's do the math first. Hey, the tariffs on cars and steel and aluminum have collected $100 billion, and China has collected $100 billion, making it $200 billion. The total US imports worldwide are $3 trillion, and you can't impose another 20% on cars. It's impossible to add another 20% on top of that, so you have to exclude cars. What about the other $2 trillion plus? At 20%, that's roughly $500 billion. Actually, let me tell you, Donald Trump. He's working on a calculation to cover the budget division, because in the first 5 months of this year, the budget division was very serious, reaching $1.1 trillion. So, because he renewed the tax cuts, he's hoping to bring out $700 to $800 billion, hoping Elon Musk can reduce it to $300 billion. I think Elon Musk is very smart to reduce it to that. So, reducing the deficit to $1 trillion, leaving just $1 trillion, that's basically it. But there's one thing that hasn't been accounted for, which is whether the interest rates on the national debt will rise again. All right. On March 31st, Donald Trump stated in the Oval Office at the White House that the details of the tariffs have been settled. On April 2nd, it was announced that the US is very hard-friendly. As for the tax rate, it's lower than what others impose on the US, but actually, in developed countries, the basic interest rate is generally 2 to 3%. The EU typically has a 3% rate, but for cars, the EU imposes a 10% tariff. That's how it is. For agricultural products, higher tariffs are generally imposed by developed countries. The tariffs imposed are not high. On March 30th, the United States Trade Representative already released this National Trade Estimate Report, which details foreign policies and regulations considered as trade barriers, almost like an encyclopedia. After 2 months of work, they produced an encyclopedic report, and then they ask how many laws are unfair to us and how much tax there is. Any country that treats Americans unfairly will receive a tariff notice on Wednesday. And this time, there will be no exemptions. No exemptions at all. Now, everyone knows that this is the case. The United States has already imposed a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum, effective March 12th. Regarding the tariffs on China, they were announced in February, and then again in March, and they are calculated based on when the ships depart. Now they are all arriving, and in fact, they are now in effect. The tariffs on cars and car parts take effect on April 4th, and you will see in April. You will see chaos in the car market. This shocked Donald Trump on April 2nd. He mentioned imposing a 25% tariff on sellers of Venezuelan oil or natural gas, which isn't significant for others. Europe has a little, Turkey has a little, but the first buyer is China, and the second is the United States itself. Is Donald Trump still threatening to impose import taxes on timber, pharmaceuticals, and chips? Now, first about copper, after steel and aluminum. Copper is an important construction and industrial raw material. He said that now to support American copper, he will impose tariffs. As for timber, it's the same. But when it comes to pharmaceuticals, he really cares about pharmaceutical chips, right? I think for now, he won't impose tariffs. Chips and pharmaceuticals, right? Many pharmaceuticals come from Europe, some affordable ones come from here, from China and India. Why impose tariffs on pharmaceuticals? He thinks these things back in the day, during the pandemic. China is unwilling to sell these things, right? You definitely have to make them yourself, right? China monopolizes those organic compounds of vitamins and antibiotics. Donald Trump won't negotiate before April 2nd, no negotiations on tariffs until after the tariffs take effect. The 25% on imported cars, right? It will be permanent, meaning if he increases it, and then you negotiate with him. For example, you set up a firewall against China and impose a 20% import tariff on Chinese goods. He might reduce it by 5% for you, because your country's productivity isn't large. He's most worried that the taxed Chinese goods will go to your place, and then to his. So, if you cut some of his tariffs, he can also cut a bit for you. For example, the import tariff on cars in Taiwan is 75%. I'm now waiting for Taiwan after April 2nd. If they cut it down, then you can buy a Tesla. Economists predict that these tariffs will lead to higher consumer prices in the US, reduced income, and harm to the American economy, along with retaliatory measures from other countries. Now, the main countries, like China, don't have much to retaliate with. They've already retaliated as much as they can. Canada will retaliate, but Mexico doesn't dare to. Then, there's South Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, and Japan. Conservative and prosperous. Donald Trump's tariffs are the largest in terms of economic impact since World War II. Now, we have to say, this is in terms of economic impact. This is the tariff rate. At this time, it's like President McKinley's tariffs. President McKinley, now, he's learning from President McKinley. So what was the result? The US kept cutting up to this point. Who would have thought that the Great Depression was caused by the Smoot-Hawley Act, which increased tariffs to this point, resulting in a major economic downturn, because global trade volume dropped by 70%. So, after the war, the US kept reducing tariffs. They kept reducing tariffs up to this point. Actually, after Nixon, they reached what is known as the Washington Consensus after the 1970s, which was to promote global trade and integration. This led to the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and then the WTO continuously reducing tariffs to almost nothing. Now, the US is preparing to increase tariffs a bit more, and this time, they are directly raising them on China. Directly raising them. A finance professor from Northwestern University said, "I don't think there are any positive benefits to this liberation. It will harm the US economy, and other countries will retaliate." All right, let me summarize this for everyone. When you impose trade restrictions, that means two things are being harmed. One is the benefit, which is speaking from the U.S. standpoint about the specialization of labor. Because the geographical scope is reduced, meaning people can't move freely. This definitely decreases efficiency. Secondly, you can't fully utilize comparative advantage. Therefore, any interference will cause a deadweight loss, which is essentially a loss of economic efficiency. This is the real impact. If countries don't impose tariffs on each other, and you impose tariffs, what happens to your economic efficiency? It will be lower than that of Europe, Japan, and Canada combined. Of course, you are smaller. So, because your economic scale is smaller and you've imposed tariffs, which have lowered production costs, your goods can't be sold, and others will boycott you. As a result, you'll end up in an internal cycle. I estimate that the world will turn into 3 circles. One circle will be the United States, and another will be other developed countries, and another circle. That would be China and the southern countries. According to economists, with the full implementation of tariffs, the price of each imported car will increase by $4,711. It's not just the imported cars. Even locally manufactured cars will see a price increase. Why? Because the parts will also be subject to the same tariffs. Moreover, it's estimated that due to this, car production in the United States will decrease by 30%. As a result, a shortage will occur, and when there's a shortage, car prices will increase, significantly raising the cost burden on consumers. When Americans find out they have to pay an extra $10,000 to buy a car, there will be an outcry worldwide. The New York asset management company Wisdom Ship notes that tariffs on goods also indirectly affect service prices. For example, the increase in car parts prices will lead to higher repair costs, and then car insurance premiums will also rise. Do you understand? This is a chain reaction that has caused the U.S. Consumer Confidence Index to drop by 20 points to 57. Does it go back to the low point during the 2008 financial crisis? This reflects the public's concern about the potential economic impact of tariff policies. Look, it's this low here. At that time it was a few, because of the interest rate hikes. It went this low. Even in 2008 it wasn't this low. 2008, well. Even in 2000 it wasn't this low. In 2000, during the dot-com bubble burst, it was as low as in 1980. You know, when inflation was over 10%, and interest rates were raised to 20%. Just the car tariffs alone affect $275 billion worth of imports. And this amount will likely be passed on to American consumers, increasing the cost of buying and maintaining cars. All right, then there's the American Petroleum Institute, urging Donald Trump. Another thing is to charge Chinese ships and ships registered in China a port entry fee of $1 million to $1.5 million, which would undermine Donald Trump's agreements and not promote his American energy dominance. Because if you charge their ships for oil and liquefied natural gas exports, what happens? Charging fees would make it more expensive. If imported cars become more expensive due to tariffs, Donald Trump says he doesn't care, because it makes American cars appear more competitive. However, he doesn't realize that American cars will also increase in price. I hope they raise their prices, because if they do, people will buy American-made cars. It will take at least 5 years to increase the capacity of American-made cars, because actually, those factories have moved to Canada. They've been gone for 70 to 80 years already. In the past 20 to 30 years, many have gone to Mexico. And even if you want to build factories, it takes several years to move back to Canada or Mexico. You also need to train workers because those workers can't come over here. That's the issue. In the second quarter of 2025, inflationary pressures will fully rise again. All right. Regarding the monetary policy considered by the central bank, I'll give you my explanation here. In the current situation, the worst-case scenario is stagflation, which means the economy is in recession while prices continue to rise. This is the issue. From the 1970s, if stagflation occurs, what happens? Economists around the world will tell you, I don't understand why some people think that cutting interest rates to save a recession will work. The problem is that it only makes things worse. Cutting interest rates to combat a recession actually sustains inflation worldwide. The method is to first control inflation, then address the recession. First, tighten the money supply to bring down inflation, and then the economy will gradually recover. All right. Facing tariffs, institutional investors are withdrawing from the U.S. stock market. The U.S. has lost $3 trillion just in technology. This is the Nasdaq index, which dropped from 20,000 points to 17,000. This is the sharpest decline. All right, the Standard & Poor's isn't as severe, it's not as severe. South Korea, China, and Japan. This means that the U.S. policy is really long-term because its attack on China is a significant trade war. South Korea, China, and Japan held talks in Seoul on March 30th, facing the U.S. president's tariff policy. Are the three strengthening free trade? The three countries are coming together, and you're pushing Japan and South Korea towards China. The trio called for accelerating their trilateral free trade agreement negotiations to create a predictable trade and investment environment. They aim to stabilize the relationships among the three, reducing their own tariffs. However, of course, when it comes to chips, they are also subject to U.S. regulations. High-end chips cannot be exported, according to South Korea's Ministry of Trade. The three countries must unite to address global challenges, taking a united stance to jointly respond to Donald Trump's tariff policy. This has pushed Japan and South Korea towards China. Japan and South Korea hope to import semiconductor raw materials from us, such as rare earths, graphite, and other similar materials. We also hope to import mature technology from Japanese and Korean chips. China, Japan, and South Korea hope to maintain smooth supply chains in these areas and not hinder the sale of these materials to Japan and South Korea. For example, Chinese minerals to Japan and South Korea. They also strive to continue supplying mature technology in chip manufacturing and many other areas. Those equipment and materials like photoresists and such. All three parties hope to address different challenges through cooperation and multilateral trade, resulting in the U.S. being isolated, and they will further strengthen free trade agreements. Based on the RCEP, they will further open up and reduce taxes mutually. The strengthening of relations between China, Japan, and South Korea poses a challenge to the United States, especially as it may weaken the U.S.'s control over China's semiconductor industry in the supply chain. Isn't this a tricky situation to deal with? Let's end this segment here, shall we?